Bassma KODMANI, thank you very much for being with us on WPC TV. You are the Executive Director of the Arab Reform Initiative, which I think was born in the days when the Arab world needed reform and before the so-called Arab Spring. We're in a situation now where the Arab Spring seems to have turned into a rather troubled weather event, not exactly summer. And Syria in particular, it poses difficulties. How do you see the solution to the Arab world in general, and in particular the solution in Syria?
Well, when we called the Arab Reform Initiative back in 2005, I would say today it's reform or revolution. And revolution means destabilization, means the emergence of players who you cannot control, etc. So I think it's a good warning to the countries that have not gone through the same uprisings to look at what they can do to avoid it, because it is obviously preferable to go the Moroccan path, which is probably the most serious in terms of reforms, and avoid what we are going through in other Arab countries.
Libya
and obviously,
being a good example of it.
Libya is a country that is falling apart, and Syria is a tragic case in point from which everyone should learn, I think, in the region.
Do you think that the West should have intervened in Syria when the revolution started, when the move against Bashar al-Assad began? And if so, in what sense should it have intervened?
Probably, I think the story of the Syrian revolution is all about what could have been done, was not done at the right time, and becomes more risky and more difficult later on. I think there was a time where it was possible to establish a no-fly zone without intervention from Turkish and from Jordanian territory, without having to bomb any of the targets of the regime. That was not done back then. It would have offered protection for humanitarian reasons, as well as for the army units who wanted to defect. And the signals were very clear that army units wanted to defect but could not go anywhere if they didn't have that safe zone. That never happened. I think in the fall of this year, after the use of chemical weapons, which was the red line set by the West, the non-bombing of specific targets of the regime, of course it was a risky operation, but then there was every reason to believe that the regime would have been seriously shaken, and more importantly, that the allies of the regime would have finally understood that the West means business, that it does support genuinely and seriously a democratic movement and change in Syria.
The West, of course, suffers from combat fatigue after Iraq and Afghanistan, and also the shifting of power among the opposition from the secular opposition to the jihadist groups. I think obviously is complicated matters.
I think it's because this comes very late. We had the options of either intervention or arming the opposition. From my personal point of view, it was safer to intervene than to arm the opposition. Maybe arming the opposition early on, but that's not just arming. It's not whether you provide sophisticated weapons or not. It's a whole strategy. It's a comprehensive strategy that includes communication, intelligence, serious organizational efforts and logistics. None of that was done. So you cannot, out of the blue, say it's sophisticated weapons or no sophisticated weapons. The answer is obvious.
Well, given the role now of Saudi Arabia, of Qatar, and on the other side perhaps of Iran, can you foresee a Syria in the short to medium term that is secular, multi-confessional, the sort of Syria that you had before?
I believe there is. It will either be a democratic, multi-sectarian Syria, or there will be no Syria. And any serious, committed Syrian knows that, including among the Islamists. Very reasonable Islamists and those who are truly Islamists say We know that Sharia is not suitable for Syria. It might work in other countries. It will not work in Syria. So either we have a democratic Syria, we have no Syria at all.
And last point, Dominic Moisey made a comment in the session that you've just been appearing in which he, in a way, foretold the erasing of the frontier lines drawn by the colonial powers. And one thinks, for example, of the Sykes-Picot Agreement. Is that what is happening? Is Syria actually fragmenting? Is Iraq fragmenting?
I think those powers who drew the map of the Middle East in 1916 in Sykes-Picot Agreement are the ones who can decide today whether they are ready for this kind of change, because it will have a domino effect. It will obviously not stop at the borders of Syria. It will extend across the region. Are we ready for that? And that's, I think, the question to ask to the United States, to Russia today, and to a lesser extent to the European powers.
Bassma KODMANI, shukran gazilan. But a final little thing. What do you get from this conference? What do you expect from it, and what do you like or dislike about it?
I think that the approach of global governance has enormous potential for innovative ideas about how to address and manage, in this case, crises, political crises and conflicts. And we obviously, when we look at Syria, we can say that we need so much of that improved global governance on managing crises that it's a reason to be here and discuss these issues.
Bassma KODMANI, shukran. Thank you very much.